are back in Esther chapter 6. If you want to go to Esther chapter 6, that is where we are. And do you remember who was here for Esther 5? A lot of hand raising tonight. I'm sorry. A lot of hand raising. But Esther 5. Okay, so back in Esther 5 to recap. So last time in Esther, what happened was Esther is going to go before the king and she's going to make a request. And she makes this weird out of left field request. We think she's going to go, will you save the Jewish people? And instead she says, what? Do you remember? Come to this party I'm throwing, right? Tonight I want to throw a party. I want you and Haman to come to the party. And then they go to the party and he's like, what do you want now? And again, she goes, come to another party, right? Which is a little like, you're like, hurry up, come on. But we talked about what she's doing is either in the grammar, she's hesitating, like it wasn't the right time. And so she's saying, you know what, let's try again. Let's look for another good opportunity. You've done that, I've done that. You're like, this is not the time to bring this up. So she's either kicking the can to the next day, or she is doing an Eastern thing, which is like, agree to this and I honor you, and then agree to this and I honor you, and get you in a good mood, and then I tell you what I really want. So no matter what, she's kind of taking her time, but on the other end, things have been speeding up and are more dire on the problem, so that Haman now is he leaves that party. He goes home and he's again incensed that Mordecai won't bow down to him outside the gate. And he goes home and he's given advice. Why don't you build a giant gallows and stab him and impale him on it? Like that would solve your problem. Just kill him. You're super powerful. Go kill the guy. So now it's that night, right? So everything's going really fast now. Now it says not anymore. You know how sometimes the Bible's like, and then 20 years later. This is like, and that afternoon, and that morning, and that's how fast this is going, okay? So that's where we've got to. So later that night, are you okay? You're good? We're good, okay. Chapter 6, okay. So on that night, the king could not sleep. And he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king says, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young man who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Well, we'll stop there. Okay, so, all right. Click, click. Okay, insomnia, right? It's a weird start. So, and that night, the king couldn't sleep. And you're like, so what? Maybe you don't think that. I might. Here's what's really cool about this is we all haven't been able to sleep, and you're like, why? Why can't I? Was it the nap I took? Was it the coffee? Is there for no reason? Is God trying to reveal something to me? Like what? We can't sleep. Now, for the king, he doesn't ask those questions. He just, which would make me sleep, he's just like, read me like the records of what's been going on in my kingdom lately. And you're like, well, sir, grain is up 30% in the eastern portion, and it's just boring, right? And maybe that's what his thing is, like, this is just boring. But it seems like he's up most of the night. So basically the idea is, what it seems to be is that this is kind of all night into the morning when Haman's going to show up. So it's a long time. They're reading all of this, and he hears, right, this recent, several years ago, but, Mordecai heard about a plot against you, and he thwarted it and let us know through your wife, and the end. And what's really cool here is this is kind of the theme of the book, right? There's these little weird circumstances, these little weird coincidences, these little things that happen that you and I go, oh, we see God behind that. And the people who are in it, someone like Ahasuerus doesn't see that. He's not looking for God. He doesn't believe in God. He believes in other gods, probably two other gods, and it doesn't matter who. This is not his worldview, and so he just thinks, I can't sleep. And what's cool to me about it is that the Lord even uses something as small and insignificant as insomnia, right? And we don't really know always how God works. And sometimes we read a passage like in 4 and we go, oh, for such a time as this, and we lock onto that. We like that, and that's kind of, again, the most famous verse in this book, and we latch on to this idea that we are called to these purposes for some destiny that we need to fulfill. And it is true that the Lord, and one of you mentioned that the Lord has, in Ephesians, he tells us he has these good works set apart for us that we should walk in them. He has these things prepped for us. He has these people he wants us to meet. He has these things he wants us to get involved with, these purposes specifically for us. Yes. But then there's things like, I can't sleep. And I don't think we tend to go, how does this factor into my life purpose? But God is using exactly that, exactly this small thing to bring about this giant purpose. And here's what's cool about that is we often want to know exactly what God is up to in our circumstances, and we rarely do. And some of you, you might come to me, sometimes people do, and they're like, why did God allow this to happen? I'm like, I don't know. Why did God allow this to happen? I don't know. What is God doing with this? I'm like, I don't know. This is a free service. You're not paying enough for me to know. I don't know. But what we should be able to answer is, what is God doing in you? And I often ask that question back. What do you think God's doing in you in this? And we should be able to say, oh, well, that I can answer, right? I know that in me, he's showing himself faithful. I know that in my life, he's showing me I need to trust him, or that I don't, or that I'm holding this back, or that I can't accept something I can't control, or whatever it may be, whatever the specifics may be aren't the point. The point is that we often think God should show us all that he's doing externally, and he doesn't. And we need to be able to say, what do I see him doing internally? Does the difference there make sense? This is, on the surface, it's just insomnia, but God is clearly using this for his purpose. The king has no idea about that, but you and I, we know better than that, don't we? Okay. So here comes Haman, verse 4. So it's like early the next morning, right? It's been all night. Early the next morning, the king hears somebody outside, and he says in verse 4, the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." Now, I don't know, if or how, when Esther was going to come, it was like, I might die. It's this big deal. She's really nervous. And Haman just kind of cavalierly shows up super early in the morning. I don't know if that's because he thought he was just, the king's favorite person. I don't know if it's because he's so powerful. We're not really sure why or what the thing is. He clearly waits. He doesn't just barge into where the king is. But he doesn't come with the same respect. Mordecai, we're going to see, loves royalty to the point where it's an idol in his life, but it doesn't mean that he respects the king at all. And so here he comes, and he comes, interestingly, actually, well, we'll see how let me not get ahead. I already get a, blah, blah, blah. Let's just take it piece by piece. Okay, so he comes in, right? And the king has this question on his mind from overnight. And so the king said, in verse 6, Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head, and the horse that the king has ridden, be brought." There it is. I missed my line. I went to the next line. "Which the king has worn." What? Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on. Back up. And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on..." No! Where is the crown part? Oh my gosh. This is freaking me out. Each time, I can't find, "Let the royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set." Thank you. Yes. I do this for a living, by the way. "And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them," now I'm all scared, "let them lead him," I'm like in 5th grade again, "let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horses you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." Okay. So obviously he thinks, right? It's automatic for him. He's so arrogant that automatically for him, no one else could possibly deserve the king's honor. I do everything for the king. I make this place function. I am the best in the East. I'm it, right? And so it's automatic for him that he should be honored. Remember, this is his whole thing. His whole thing, we went back, we said that Haman embodies that Tower of Babel mentality that says, control religion, make everybody be the same, and honor yourself, right? That whole paradigm, he embodies that. And so he wants what the king has. Now, here's what's interesting. Haman has essentially just as much power in the kingdom. He still have to ask for things, but he kind of rules everything effectively. So he has so much power. He has extravagant money. He's just like, he has got it made in the shade. And what does he want? He doesn't want more power. He doesn't want more money. Why? Those things he doesn't need more of that. Those things don't satisfy him anymore. What does he want? He wants to be basically the king. He wants to be as close as he can be to being the king, right? This is the only thing. He wants honor. He wants to be paraded in the street. He wants to be famous. He wants to be admired. He wants to be respected. He wants to be loved. Do you remember what he had the king make everybody do? Everybody had to bow down to him. And we said that if he was really this really honorable person, you don't have to, A, you don't ask people to bow down to you because that's weird. And B, you don't have to make them bow down to you, right? You don't ask for it because you don't need it. And you don't need, if you needed it, you wouldn't have to make them do it. It's kind of false, right? For him, I'm sure he always knows in the back of his head, oh, they have to. The king made them bow down to me. And so now this is the closest he can get to being the king. This was a common practice. It's not something that he necessarily made up. Ancient historians talk about this practice that they would let you kind of be in almost like the king's outfit, like you would disguise yourself almost as the king. So he's not making this up out of nowhere, but it's interesting that this is the ultimate thing that he wants. He desires more than anything to be honored, right? Here's what's interesting about that. And let me give you like kind of the keys to the kingdom here a little bit in the Bible. And if you ever take my Unfolding Gospel class, and if I ever schedule it correctly, we will have it again. But if you ever take that, part of what we talk about in that class is that the Bible is building this story that does not directly relate to your life before it relates to Jesus. So we go from the Bible and the things, especially in the Old Testament, we go, this is pointing me to a bigger version in Jesus. And so when we take a story like this, what I don't want to do, and I don't want you to walk away being like, that was just a metaphor. It was just a legend. It was just a nice moral lesson. No. What I'm saying is it's a picture of something, it's a shadow of something that's more true in Jesus, okay? It's more true in Jesus. And so here's what's cool is he wants to be clothed in the king's robe and crown and on his horse to basically be, in every way, he wants to be like the king, but he's not really the king. He wants something that he doesn't really deserve, right? And so similarly, when we talk about the gospel, Jesus is the king, although we don't recognize him. He comes as the king, although, as we're going to see in a second, he comes and lives a life of dishonor and shame, and yet he puts his royalty on us. He allows us to be in his clothes, to be. It talks about in Isaiah the exchange of rags for this headdress or crown of beauty, and so Jesus comes and he calls us. The fellowship of the firstborn, that we are all not the king, but we are all like the Prince of Wales. Does that make sense? Do you know what that means? Are you like, did you watch The Crown? Okay, yes. I know it's probably bad and I can't say that, but yeah, okay. So you are all like the heir. You're all the permanent, like when it says firstborn, it means that you will inherit the kingdom. That's your destiny. That's the thing. So when we go, what is my such a time as this? It's hard to know right now. But what is my future destiny? What does God have outlined for me? What is my purpose ultimately? It's to be with him, to rule and reign with him, to inherit along with him, and to inherit along with each other. It's bigger than just now. It's much bigger. And so we get this little glimpse of, honor can be bestowed even though it's not deserved by giving someone else's honor onto you. That's exactly what you and I experience with the gospel. It is not our honor. It is not our deservedness. It is not our goodness. It's not our righteousness. It is Jesus putting his robe on us. It's us being in him. And we're going to see that further in this story. Okay. Haman comes in, and he comes in to honor an enemy, but he has no idea about it. He doesn't know that's what he's coming to do. Esther came in to honor an enemy as well. She comes to honor Haman when she invites him to the banquet, but she does it right for a bigger purpose because she's starting to clue into God is kind of moving her, I think, step by step. I don't think she knows the whole end game, but she's willing to honor an enemy because this is God's higher purpose. Haman can only honor his enemy unwittingly because he would never willingly give up honor. That's the world, right? You would never give your honor away, but Jesus goes, well, I give mine away. I give it to you so you're able to honor others. You're even able to honor those that are enemies or that are in power over you. That's why the Bible talks about honor the king or honor the emperor, sometimes it's translated, that we would pray for those in power, those who alarm us or frighten us or who we feel frustrated by. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a family member, whomever it may be. We can actually act with respect and give honor to those who have more power than us because Jesus has honored us, and we don't worry, as we'll see in a second, we don't worry about being ashamed. Okay. All right. But Haman is also here. We said he kind of embodies the Tower of Babel mentality. He also, if we go all the way, which way do you read this way? So this is the past for you. So if we go all the way back to Genesis 3, he also embodies the heart of sin. I've said this before about him, but I'm going to say it again here because here it's really prevalent, right? So Haman here, what's his whole thing? His whole thing is, you shouldn't be the king. You shouldn't be as honored. I should be. I do everything and you drink too much. That's kind of, I don't know if he's thinking that, but like I should be king, basically, I think is what's really in his heart. And I can't be satisfied until I am king. I can't be satisfied until I'm loved and respected and feared and all of these things until the whole kingdom swirls around me and wraps around me. I can't be happy. Remember what he said in chapter 5 to his, none of this matters, he said to his wife and his friends. None of this matters. Well, Mordecai still won't bow down to me, right? It's still this thorn in his side. And so that is not just the heart of this narcissistic man, and we can be like, oh, you're a terrible person, which he is. But it's also the heart of our own sin. And I've said this before, so if you're like, you repeat yourself too much, I do it on purpose. But this is the heart of sin, to say, you shouldn't be honored. And you know what? Ultimately, God, you shouldn't be honored over me. I should be honored. We go, why would God need to glorify himself? And we get all tweaked about like, why does God care so much about his own glories? He's so full of himself, which no, and there's reasons for that. And we can talk about why that's totally different. But we do the exact same thing all the time. All the time. This is about me, my glory, my comfort, my reputation. I need to be accepted. I need to be loved. I want me. That's how we live. That's the core of our sin, is it's saying to Jesus, you shouldn't be king. You get off the throne. I will take your kingship. I will rule and reign in my life. I will call the shots, and you don't get to. And that's almost my definition of sin. That's what's going on back in the Garden of Eden when it's God puts them, Adam and Eve, in the garden, and he basically says, I've begun these purposes. I've created the world. Now you continue to cultivate it. I've been creative. You continue to be creative. Name animals and go out and flourish and create more people and make this world that I've begun, right? So he gives them, almost like a king and queen, he gives them this purpose, and pretty quickly, it seems, they turn around, and instead of taking on that purpose as kind of a representative king and queen, they say we should be king and queen of everything. Like we should call the shots in our lives because you're holding something back from us. This weird creepy snake over here told us that you're lying to us and we're not getting what we deserve, and so we're going to go ahead and step out and do what we want. We're going to call the shots. We know better than you. And ultimately, this separates them from him. And actually, what's the very first thing Adam and Eve experience when they sin? Do you remember? Shame. Nakedness. Do you know what shame is the opposite of? Honor. We are on to something. Okay, we're on to something. All right. Okay. All right. So the king, in this weird way, he refers to Mordecai here differently than we've seen him, Mordecai be referred to before. So the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and so do to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." Okay. So Mordecai the Jew. This is a little bit of like a twist, okay? All of a sudden, the king knows that Mordecai is Jewish. Mordecai, for a long time, this was a secret. Do you remember? He's telling Esther, keep it a secret. Don't tell them that we're Jewish. And so it's been this secret, and now it's like this open secret, or it's out. He started to tell, if you remember, subtle. A lot of the stuff in the Bible, you have to be like, it was really a subtle thing. He started to tell the other guys that worked with him. So Mordecai, historically, again, if you haven't been here, Mordecai would be one of the king's officials. That's why he's always at the palace, basically. That's why he's in, it's called the gate. He's in like the federal office building of the day, okay? He's there because he works for the king, right? Now, the Bible doesn't say that, but historically, that's why he would be there, and that's why he would be close enough to still communicate to Esther through the eunuchs that are watching her. Do you remember any of that? Just pretend. Yes, you just pretend. Okay, so he works for the king. The king now is at least more aware of him since last night because he just read, oh, Mordecai saved my life and saved my kingdom. Mordecai, I love Mordecai. He's the best. And so now he calls him Mordecai the Jew. And the whoever wrote this is bringing our attention now to Mordecai as a Jew. And the first thing that happens to Mordecai as a Jew when he's like, he's a Jew, then what happens right next? Right next? Is that a thing? Right then. What happens right then? I'll read it again. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." So Mordecai had different plans for this day. His plan for the day was he had set up this, it says gallows. Again, historically, the Persians, they invented crucifixion, but this word it's a spike that they would stick people on. So he already has the spike ready. He's going to impale Mordecai on it. The spike is at his house, which is weird. And so that's what his plan is for the day. So he went early in the morning to make this happen. Maybe, we don't know, maybe because he wanted to get it done before he goes to a banquet and Esther gets to ask whatever she's going to ask and he doesn't know what it is. We don't know. That's me reading in. I don't know. But for some reason, he's in a hurry. He goes. He's asking for this. That was his plan for the day. Instead, he spends all day getting his little minion guys to walk around and be like, this is how the king wishes to honor people. Yay, Mordecai. And I don't know if he has to walk behind him or what. The king makes it sound like you have to go do this, like you be the one who walks around with the horse. I'm not really sure, but this is now how he has to spend his day. So all that to say, we're introduced now, Mordecai is like out public, he's a Jew, and immediately we see him being honored by a Gentile. Okay, there's meaning to this. So Mordecai the Jew. Mordecai was, do you remember? So before we got into this whole thing of the Persians are going to kill all the Jews in Persia, in the empire, there was only one Jew that was causing a problem, and it was Mordecai. So Mordecai, follow me here. Like, stop checking your email. Follow me here, because this is like, you're like, now I'm confused. Just follow me. Okay, because this is important, or else the next few slides will be garbage to you. So pay attention. Mordecai is one Jew who the powers that be want to kill, right? Because he won't bow down to them. when that isn't working, or it's not working yet, it expands, and they're going to kill we might as well kill all of the Jews while we're at it, right? But now Mordecai is also the first Jew who's going to truly be publicly honored, okay, knowing he's a Jew. It seems that the king still doesn't know that Esther, she's still kind of quiet about this. We'll get to Esther. Brian gets to do Esther next time, and her deal, and it follows on this, but this is setting the stage. This is where like everything shifts right here. This is the fulcrum of the story in a lot of ways, okay? Let me say it again. There was one Jew that they caused them a problem, and so they were going to kill him, and they decided to kill all the Jews. And then he's also the first one that is going to be publicly honored. And if you stick with the whole book, the fate of all the Jews in the book, I promise, will change. Here's what's kind of cool about that. It's like, what are you talking about? Here's what I'm talking about, right? Without me being like, let me get to it. Here's what I'm talking about. Again, the things in the Bible, I'm not saying that they're just metaphors or they're just allegories of Jesus. However, they point to these bigger meanings in what Jesus did. What happens in especially the Old Testament is pointing us to a bigger version of that thing, right? And the bigger version of this is when it talks about Mordecai the Jew, he sort of embodies and represents the rest of the Jewish people in this book. What happens to him is going to happen to them. At first, in a scary way. We hate you and we're going to kill you, and so we hate them and we're going to kill them. But then we honor you, and pretty soon we're going to honor them. We'll rescue you, and they will be rescued. So what happens to Mordecai kind of happens to the rest of the Jewish people. What happens to Jesus is our representative, and what happens to him happens to us. Or let me put it a more better way. A more better way is what is true of the Israelites in the Old Testament, or what should have been true, but they failed to live up to. Jesus comes along as their representative, and it's ultimately true of him. Because it's ultimately true of him, he makes it true of us. Let me give you some things. So one, before Jesus in the Bible is ever called the Son of God, the phrase of talking about God's Son is always talking about the people of Israel. They are God's son, okay? When he says, out of Egypt I have called my son, before that ever refers to Jesus, it refers to Israel. Track with me here. You'll feel really smart when you go home tonight, or a little bit confused. Either one. Usually they're the same thing. Okay. Israel is called God's son. Jesus is way more God's son than Israel ever was. Because Jesus is way more God's son than Israel ever was, he gives you and I the right to be called sons of God in 1 John 3:2. Well, it's a good place. I can't think of other places off the top of my head, but that's a good one. We are then called God's sons. Why sons, ladies? Because sons inherit. That's I think, if we take the whole Bible, that's why it's gender son. Men, we're called a bride, so, just, it's all the same. Okay, so let me say it again. What was true or should have been true of Israel, Jesus ultimately fulfilled and then makes that true of you and me, even if we don't deserve it. Do you follow that at least? Yes. Do you feel smarter now? Okay, good. Not that I'm smart, but this is kind of like the Bible tells us. This is not it tells us outright, but when you read the thing and you read it and you go through and you're like, how does this work? That's how the game works, okay? So Jesus is our representative. Jesus is the one who goes before us. Jesus is the one in whom we have all the blessings, the Bible says. We receive all these blessings in him. And Brian recently has talked about being in Christ. There's all these verses about being in Christ. What this means is you're lumped in with him. You're identified with him. So it means that Jesus, and I've said this to you probably 100 times, Jesus goes to the cross with your name tag on. The name tag says Andrew or whatever your name is, right? Yeah, that's. It's not just that he goes, oh, I'm going to go, and so you don't have to. That's true. But he also, it's as though you did. It's as good as if you went to the cross. It's as good as if you had obeyed your whole life. It's as good as that because Jesus did those. Israel's supposed to obey, right? They're supposed to, for example, go through the wilderness and be faithful to the Lord in the wilderness through temptation. They were not. Jesus goes out to the wilderness. He's faithful to the Lord in the wilderness through temptation. Therefore, you, even though you fail in temptation, are accounted as obedient to the Lord. Do you kind of see? It all connects. Okay. It's not weird. It's just how the Bible goes. All right. So Jesus is also, he's what's called the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep or those who have died. So the Bible gives us this promise that just as I keep forgetting his name. Oh, he's Mordecai. I don't know why I always call him Haman. Just as Mordecai is, we'll say, vindicated and honored and saved, so we can kind of look at that pointing to Jesus. So Mordecai is vindicated, and the Bible talks in Philippians about Jesus being vindicated by the Spirit. Do you know what vindicated is? Vindicated is that lovely, delicious feeling when you were right and Google proved it, and then you're just like, it's cool. But inside you're like, yes, I was right. And you now have to acknowledge that in some way. I watch you squirm, right? That's kind of what vindicated is like, right? Or what's better for this story would be the idea that maybe you got in trouble or you were blamed or lied about for something, right? We've experienced this, some of you in pretty difficult ways. And then, oh, boom, here comes this evidence, and now you are shown to be righteous. You're shown to be, no, what I said was true. I'm correct. I'm right, right? And so with Jesus, do you know, I'll give you 1,000,000 points. They're worth nothing. Do you know in the Bible what event the Bible says vindicates Jesus, shows that he was true, shows that he was right, shows that he was who he says he was? The resurrection. So this is talking about the resurrection as well. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits, right? That first sample, that sample size of the whole, right? The first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Meaning this, as we look at Jesus, the rest of us follow. As we, oh my gosh, 7:30. As we look at Jesus, what I was worried I was going to go short for the first time in my life. It'll never happen. As we look at Jesus, what is true of Jesus becomes true of us, meaning if he rose from the dead, we shall rise from the dead. And with that, if he is glorified and not ashamed, we will be glorified and not ashamed. I talked to you last time about the power-fear cultures and the power-fear dynamics and how when we're talking about sticking somebody on a stick, right, and I have all this power and you bow to me and scepters and death and all that stuff, that's all a power-fear thing, right? But this story also involves this honor-shame idea. And this honor-shame idea, which I don't really have time to fully go into, take a class and we'll talk about it in there. But it's the idea that the identity comes from the group, and the worst thing that can happen to you is to be shamed and put aside and be alone. And the best thing that can happen to you is that somebody with honor gives you honor. Somebody with honor says that you're important. And you gain honor by being related to or associated with an honorable person. And you gain shame by being related to or associated with a dishonorable person. So that you better choose your friends wisely and distance yourself from people well, because they can drag you down. But Jesus comes along, and Jesus actually comes and he says, not only I'm not going to distance myself from you, I'm actually going to be right here. That was the Pharisees' whole problem. Why do you eat and drink with these people? They weren't actually saying you're bad. They're saying you're bad if you hang out with them because they're bad. Their ick gets on you. And Jesus goes, I know. That's why I came here, right? And so he comes and he ends his earthly life with a crown of thorns and a robe, being mocked, having his beard torn out and being spit on. What was that all about? That was shaming him, right? So he takes on shame. He allows himself to take the very thing that many of us, especially I would say many of the men in the room, fear more than anything, which is to live a life of shame and disrespect and public humiliation. Jesus takes that on, just like we saw him take on our fear a couple weeks ago. He takes on our shame and he exchanges it for our honor. Isaiah 53:3 says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not, right? He was shamed, shameful. Romans 10:11 says, for the scripture says, anyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. In the Israelite Jewish mindset, to be put to shame is equivalent to you and I saying be sent to hell or judged eternally. That's how strongly they would view shame. Romans 8:16-17, though, talks about the honor that we're given. It says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. John 8:28 says, Jesus said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. Okay. He's saying when you lift him up, that sounds like, ah, and what he means is on a cross, right? Just as Mordecai here was lifted up on a horse, but it was supposed to be that day that he'd be lifted up on a impaling spike thing, right? And so Jesus is the one who, Mordecai's is like, whoo, what a good switcheroo. And Jesus is a terrible switcheroo. He goes, I'll be impaled so that you can be on the horse. I'll switch places with you. I'll be shamed that you will never have to be. And even if you're embarrassed, it never rises to the level of being cast into outer darkness. You'll never be truly alone. You'll never be truly vilified. You'll be vindicated with me. Is that me making a stretch because I didn't have enough to talk about in chapter 6, and so I had to really like stretch and be like, let's get Jesus in here? No, this is the bigger, better version of, so what? So Mordecai gets honored. The Jews are still doomed in his mind, right? He says he went back to the court, right? He basically goes back to work. Like, okay, I didn't ask for that. That was kind of nice. It's kind of nice that the king acknowledged that I was, nice. Great. We're still in big trouble, and I didn't get anything out of this anyway. And so, like, this is nice, but this is not really that helpful. Mordecai, though, not Mordecai, I keep calling him that. Haman, I keep mixing him. Haman goes home, and in verses 12 through 14, we see Haman's response. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered, right? I've lost everything. He's mourning now. It's like, oh my gosh, I had to honor somebody else. I had to honor my enemy. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to him. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that happened to him. Remember last night or the day before? Their response was, just go kill him and you'll feel better, right? Just go deal with this. Look at this time. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Ooh, dun, dun, dun. This is like a different response. Last night or yesterday, they were all like, oh, it's okay, let's just do this. And now they're seeing something different. What most commentators say is going on is that in their worldview, when you start to see somebody rise, it's because the gods, the fates, the universe has made that happen. They don't believe, right, in the God of the Bible, but they believe some superstitious-y thing is happening here. The universe is making, or really the gods, are making this person rise up, and you can't fight against that. And so things have shifted, and now you are out of favor with the gods, and he's in favor with the gods. They don't realize that it's always been that way. This was always going to be how these things were going to come about. But now they're like, oh, you're doomed. It seems like what they're doing is this. If he's a Jew, then he represents the Jewish people. They must be in favor as well. And if they're in favor and you have sought to kill all of them, you are going to not only be out of favor, but you might be killed in their place. And they're starting to clue into what is going on here, right? They're figuring this out. And so, and now he has to go. Verse 14. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. And now he's like, oh, now I'm out of favor. Now I have to go to this dinner. I really don't want to go. Can I come up with an excuse? Who was the last, I'll give you 10,000 more points. Who was the last person in the book where the eunuchs came and made that person go into a feast with the king? Vashti, yes, 10,000 points for whoever that was over there, yes. And she was demoted, right? So the story is so intricate. It's saying, hey, dun, 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 you're doomed here, right? Here's what's cool. And I don't know if we have time for a song. Romulo can decide. Here's what's cool. Outside of Jesus, like Haman, nothing that you think you want is going to satisfy you. No amount of honor is going to satisfy you. And in actuality, when we look at the powers of the world and we give them so much credit and they scare us so much sometimes and we're frustrated and we feel powerless under their feet at times, God can use something as simple as not being able to sleep one night to change everything. You have no idea what God is up to in your circumstances or the circumstances of people that you may not even be acquainted with. At the same time, we should be able to say what God is doing in us, but ultimately, we look and say, what has God done for us? He took on our shame to give us his honor. He said, I am the true king. I'm going to put my robes on you to make you my representative. I'm going to put my robes on you to honor you. I'm going to let you live in my purpose. Because of that, because that is always true, all the other stuff, all the littler stuff suddenly comes into focus, and we go, okay, you will take care, because the worst case scenario can never happen to me. It happened to you. The best case scenario will happen to me, even if it comes with difficulty here and now. Does that kind of make sense? That was a long thesis statement, so that's probably not a very good one.